We're live? Yes, ma'am? No, tell me now. It's live. Tell the whole world. No? 38 in your black book. Let's stand. As you know, I like to get us to learn new songs, and I like to use Sunday school to do that. And this song is one that is not very familiar to us. So let's try it. Let's all stand. 38 in the black book. Oh, magnify the Lord with me and bless his holy name. Sing praises to his majesty and all his works proclaim. Oh, magnify the Lord. Oh, magnify the Lord. Oh, magnify the Lord with me and bless his holy name. Lane, open us in prayer. Amen. At least for today, Lord. Amen. And then that you'll heal him up nice and quick and efficiently, Lord. And I pray that you protect us today. I pray that you give us energy throughout this week, throughout this exercise, Lord. Just give us energy, be able to have us glorify you, Lord. Just you open up our hearts and our minds, Lord. We love and submit to you, Lord. Amen. You may be seated. All right, we're pressing on in our studies in comparative cults and world religions, and we're up to the section on the history of Confucianism in Korea. And in my notes, that's at the bottom of page 59, but I've come to the understanding that when you publish these things, that the page numbers get changed. Now, I don't know how that works, but I'm thinking if you look on 58, 59, and 60, you'll find it there somewhere. So the history of Confucianism in Korea, and just like I did with Buddhism, I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that. You can go back and read it on your own. But I got most of the information in this section from a book that was written by a man named Charles Allen Clark. He wrote a book called Religions of Korea in the 1900s. And he did a lot of extensive work on religions in Korea. And so he had a pretty good section on Confucianism in Korea. And so as far as the history of it, I got a lot of the information from that book. So I'm giving him kudos for that. Today, less than 1% of South Korea practices Confucianism. I say practices. As a functioning religion, it's pretty much dead. In fact, in the whole world, it's estimated that less than 10 million people are actually followers of Confucianism. And, you know, you can do the math. If you do the math, that is like less than 0.1%. That's like 0.09% of the world population. And so why do we have Confucianism in the course then? Well, because if you are Korean, you still think this way. It's in your, I don't want to say DNA, it's in your culture, it's in your upbringing, and we'll see some of that as we get through it. In South Korea, it's often seen more as a cultural or an ethical framework, and that is very much practiced to the point where it can actually become a bit of a problem. I don't have this problem so much now because I've gotten slightly older. But one of the things about Confucianism is the respect for those that are older than you. And that is proper and that is right. But sometimes it can become a problem because I remember when I was 26 and I was pastoring, and I had some folks in the church that were in their 40s and they were Korean. They did not respect me as a pastor. Why? Because they were older and I was supposed to respect them. So it can be a problem, and it was a problem, but not so much now. So the ideas or the philosophies of Confucianism on the surface, many of those There's really basically four, and we'll go over that when we get down to it. But a lot of that is good on the surface. It's when we take it to an extreme where it becomes a problem. It was around 550 BC where Korea received the works that Confucianism in Korea is basically built upon. And, you can trace it through the dynasties, through the Shilla dynasty and the Koryo dynasty. And so by the time you get down to the late 10th century, Koreans began traveling to China to study Confucianism. It was a big deal back then because they used that. If you really knew your stuff in Confucianism, then you were qualified, to be a better teacher or to be a government worker in civil administration. And they designed tests based upon Confucianist philosophy. And if you did well on the test, then you could get a job basically working for the government. But that all was abolished in 1895, and that went by the wayside. So that's kind of a quick thing in the history. You can go back and read through a lot of the details on your own if you want. But the influence of Confucianism in Korea is everywhere. And it's still, you can still see Confucianist temples, and the less than 1% still practice their sacrifices there. But it's pretty much as a religion done for, okay? The next time I teach this class, unless I'm teaching a bunch of Koreans this class, I may not even teach it because it's so done for. Ancestral worship. What's the Korean word for that? Who can tell me what I'm talking about? Ancestral worship. What do you do once a year? What do you do once a year? And somebody, say your grandma dies or your mother dies or your father dies or something. Once a year, what do you do? Maybe not you, but I mean just Koreans in general. What do they do? Yeah. And it's called chesa, right? And you do that. Well, guess where that comes from? That comes from Confucianism. All right? With a little mix of shamanism in there. That's next on our plate. We'll get to that. This thought, this ancestral worship thought, is considered to be one of the most vital influences of ancient Confucianism, and it's a major part of Korean culture today, so much so that Korean Christians who don't want, or should not want, let me say it that way, and don't want to partake in ancestral worship, they're lambasted by their family. They're sometimes they're treated as outcasts, and especially if they're younger and single, they're like, "What? You don't respect the family anymore? You don't respect family culture? You don't respect your mother or grandmother, whatever it is?" There's a lot of pressure that's put on them. Even the grave itself is chosen very carefully to make sure that the rules and the laws, which all comes from Confucianist philosophy, all of that has to be followed. What's interesting to me, and I've been here a long time, long enough to notice this. I noticed it and then I asked about it and I was told. But in Korea, when you build a building, at least maybe not as much nowadays, but definitely much more, say 20 years ago, if you built a building, then your windows had to face which direction? Why? The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. That's great. But my house has windows on all four sides. So I'm not so sure that's a big deal, but it's very important. I mean, the very structure itself has to follow these basic philosophies, which goes back to Confucianism. So there is still a lot of influence in Korea today on that. I've got a section here on the influence on modern society. And again, I'm going to let you just kind of peruse through that on your own. I'll say this. The Confucianism that we see in Korea and its effects on South Korea, it's been said that it helped to modernize the country. But in reality, it actually slowed progress because it was a major contributor to the hermit kingdom mentality. Does anybody know what that means, the hermit kingdom mentality? Yes, sir. Okay, yes? Okay, just us four, no more. All right, Brother Story? Right, so they didn't want foreign influence. Why not? Because they had their culture and they didn't want it spoiled. And that culture was based on Confucianism. So it probably slowed progress. It's a major contributor to that mentality for many years. Now, in the turn of the century, Korea opened up and lots of ideas have flowed in and out. And now Korea is, I think, like the 9th most powerful nation in the world. They had to get over that whole hermit kingdom idea in order to get there. So, skip down to the teachings and beliefs, and let's see what we can find out here. Confucianism teaches that there is a natural social order to society, which can best be explained through 5 relationships. Earlier I said 4, but I forgot one. Sorry, 5. Okay, 5 relationships. And the first one is the ruler to the ruled. The king and his subjects. Then there's the relationship of the father to the son. Then the older brother to the younger brother. Then the husband to the wife. And then friends to friends. Okay, so those are the 5 basic relationships defined in Confucianism. And in these relationships, the second role is considered subordinate to the first. So the ruler the ruled are subordinate to the ruler. And the son is subordinate to the father, and the younger brother is subordinate to the older brother, and the wife is subordinate to the husband. And with friend to friend, you have a kind of a different dynamic there, and I'll speak more about that in a minute. So, and at first, when you read that, does that sound somewhat biblical? Somewhat biblical? Okay, somebody talk to me here. Give me an example. What do you mean by somewhat biblical? Okay, in the home. All right, so the wife is to submit to her husband, so that sounds right. What about the ruler to the ruled? The ruler to the ruled. Is there a biblical definition there? All right, and what are we supposed to do with the government? Submit to it. And the wife submits to her husband, and the children submit to their father, and so on. So some of this sounds biblical on the surface. So there are, and I'll get more into this in just a minute, but there are several concepts that need to be practiced in order to achieve an ordered society. Now, this is Confucianist teaching, okay? First, they've got Gen, which is human kindness shown toward another. Well, that sounds good. I mean, I don't like to live in a world where people are jerks all the time, right? So kindness is nice. Then you had Li, which is proper etiquette, treating people with manners, right? What bothers me sometimes is the way men act around women. And it bothers me. Now, I know that nowadays it seems like women don't mind it so much. But maybe that's because of the way we've been acting for so long. But necessary bodily functions, like it's a big deal. Like, yeah, that one's mine. You classless jerk. That's not funny. Unless you're a redneck or a hillbilly somewhere. And I'm going to get hate mail for that comment. But anyway, you know what I'm saying? Or foul language. Foul language around women, that makes me so mad. If I go somewhere with my wife and I hear somebody using the F word, I just want to slap them. I know I'm not supposed to because I'm a pastor, but I want to. It's wrong. It's called having respect, right? So in Confucianism, there is this proper etiquette, and then there's this idea of filial piety, respecting your elders, or in the family specifically, the sons to the father, or the younger brother to the older brother. So that's the concept. Now let's look and see why it breaks down. Well, first of all, did I mention Jesus anywhere in there? Yeah, so there's a problem there. And all that really nice stuff about having etiquette and all of that nice stuff about, respecting your authorities and all. That's all nice. But without Jesus, it doesn't matter. Right? It's all useless. So we can start right there by understanding that the philosophy itself breaks down immediately because there's no Christ. There's no salvation in that. Okay? So the ethical system taught by Confucius has much to commend. Virtue is something that we highly desire, even among believers. But the ethical philosophy he espoused was one of self-effort, leaving no room or no need for God. So even in the areas where we would tend to agree, there are some horrible imbalances of application. So we're going to kind of go back to these 5 relationships and see the biblical imbalance. And I usually get myself in trouble going through this, so I don't think today's going to be any different. So the first one was the ruler to the ruled. And there's a sense when this is biblical, right? Ephesians chapter 6, verses 5 and 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6, verses 1 and 2. We learn that we are to submit to our government. Confucianism puts the master in such a position that he is practically unaccountable to anyone for his actions. That's where it breaks down. I need someone to read Colossians chapter 4, verse 1. Who wants to read that? Everyone wants to read that. I can only one of you, please, please. Okay, go ahead. Mm-hmm.
Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven.
So if you're a master, you still have to treat your servants fairly. What's just and equal? Ephesians chapter 6, verse 9. Who wants that one? Go for it. Yes, I do not know how you can see those little words in that little.
And ye masters, do the same thing unto them, forbearing, threatening, knowing that your master also is in heaven, neither is there respect of persons with him.
What does that mean, forbearing, threatening? You don't threaten. In other words, as a master, I should not find myself going, you better do this or else I'm going to do that. Okay? This is what we call, Peter, good to see you, brother. Come in, long time no see. Yeah, I know. Work, right? We need to pray for you to get a job. You don't work on Sundays. Amen. Yeah, so we are as masters, we're supposed to treat those under us fairly. Is there any difference between the master and the servant when it comes to value before God? No. But in Confucianism, I am the master. You are the subordinate. How dare you look at me like that? Right? So there's a lot of that still in the Korean culture, and it's, I don't know how to say it. It's not biblical to take it to that extreme. All right, father to son. Again, it's a biblical principle. Ephesians 6:1, children, obey your parents in the Lord. Colossians 3:20, same principle. But in Confucianist society, it is often taken to an extreme. In many Asian cultures, the father, and sometimes the mother, retains absolute authority, not only during a child's growth and maturity, but often even after marriage. Now, let me caveat that by saying, and I'm going to preach on this a little bit later, if you're a parent, you never stop being a parent. Right? I mean, my kids are always going to be my kids until the day we die. Nothing is ever going to be able to dissolve that. But the relationship changes in time. I'm not going to call my son and tell him to come home and clean my car. You know what I'm saying? I don't have the authority to do, maybe I have authority to say that, but it's not going to happen. That's unrealistic. However, in many Asian homes, that's not what we see happening, okay? Turn to Genesis chapter 2, verses 23 through 25, and I need a volunteer to read that. Okay, good. You looked at me. You can read it. 23 through 25.
Therefore shall a man leave his father and his mother, and shall cleave unto his wife, and they shall be one flesh. And they were both naked, the man and his wife, and were not ashamed.
So biblically speaking, when a man or a woman gets married, they begin their own family, and we have the leave and cleave principle. Now they are their own. And now the man is no longer, dad is no longer directing him. But he is now in charge of taking care of his own home, and he has to do that. Now, I will say this, that my son calls me and asks me advice, and I give it to him. And sometimes he follows it, sometimes he doesn't, but he has to make that call. Or sometimes I'll see him doing something I think is dumb, and I'll tell him I think it's dumb, with the understanding that he may listen or he may not. But that's I don't view him as being a disobedient and rebellious son now, because that portion of the relationship has changed. In Asian culture, and especially in the old days, like 20 years ago, that's the old days for some of us, all right? Man, if you were the mother-in-law, you were to be feared, right? Brother Kim, you fear your mother-in-law?
No.
Oh. Liar! Yes or no? A little bit, right? Yeah, it's part of the culture. You can't really escape that, right? Okay. Peter, you fear your mother-in-law? Yes? No? Not your mother, your mother-in-law. A little bit? Yeah. Brother Do?
I love my mother-in-law, but
Yes. Yes. Okay. That's good that you love her. But when she was living, if the mother-in-law was coming to visit, was there a certain level of stress?
but it's coming, but I overcame her, that it was many years to
Yes.
raise my kids.
Right. And then the Korean ladies, they know mother-in-law. You ever notice it's always the mother-in-law? Right? It's always the mother-in-law. And that always tends to be the thing, the father-in-law, he's cool, he loves everybody, he's just happy, he sits back on the sofa and says, yeah, whatever. But the mother-in-law, yeah, she's the one. And if you're Korean, you might not like what I'm saying, but you can't deny it. You know it's right. I've been here long enough to know. I've seen way too many families. I know how this works. Why is it that way? Culture. Where did the culture come from? Confucianism. To the point where I've seen cases where the mother-in-law said, no, you will not do that. You will do this. And that's what they did. Because she said it. All right? So there's an imbalance there in the family. Older brother to younger brother. According to the scriptures, the older brother received a larger inheritance. It was understood that he would someday become the head of the clan. This is also expressed within the framework of Confucianist society, but the application is not so accurately defined. So it's difficult to see any real difference between the biblical view and the Confucianist view at this point. It's really hard to see. But as in other relationships, the higher one is not accountable to the lower one. Okay? It's just the way it is. If you've got a bad boss, you got a bad boss. You better submit to him. You got an older brother that's demanding and beating you up and taking your candy bar every day. Too bad. He's the older brother. That's his right. Okay? Forget equality, forget freedom. That is the way that works. Husband to wife, in Confucianism, the wife is completely subservient to the husband. And a lot of guys get off on that. They like that idea. Not me. It's scary. You know why it's scary? Because that means that I have to make sure that I don't make mistakes when I'm leading. And that's scary. And in Confucianism, it is taken to an extreme. Like the wife is an asset. She is not a person. She is something that is possessed. I don't mean demonically possessed. She is something that is owned. Okay? Do we have that in American society? Give me an example.
There are some places, and I hate to point out a particular spot, but some places in backcountry Appalachia,
Okay?
it's like that.
It's like that in a lot of places. For example, a young guy gets himself a really educated and beautiful young woman to hang on his arm, and she becomes his trophy woman, trophy wife. It's almost like she's an asset instead of a person. And that's, congratulations, you found yourself a smart and beautiful woman, but she's still a person. And so therefore she still has a will and so forth. But the wife in Confucianism has no will. She has no rights at all. She's found to be of value only in her relationship to the husband. The husband is never wrong. And if he is wrong, see rule number 1. Husbands, how many husbands? See, 1, 2, 2.5, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so most of us are husbands. Have you ever made a mistake in leadership? Yeah. Hey, your time is coming, okay? So don't hit him yet. All right? Of course, we make mistakes. And I find that usually, sometimes my wife is in on the mistake. Especially in our younger years, we were both ignorant and didn't know what was going on, and we both made bad decisions. Not sin, but just dumb things. But most of the time, if there's a mistake made with the Taylor family now, I make the mistake, and most of the time, she told me not to do it. And if I would have listened to the wisdom that's in my wife's lips, I might not have made the mistake. There's a balance there. But not in Confucianism. In Confucianism, there is no balance. The wife is something, not someone. So there's several factors we have to consider. This is May, Family Month, so this is a good time to get to this spot. But in a marriage relationship, the wife voluntarily submits to the husband's leadership. She doesn't have to marry you. I mean, unless you got a shotgun, that sort of thing. But in normal everyday life, ideally speaking, that woman chose to marry you. And in most cases, you didn't deserve her. Is that not the truth? Most men in here would say, yeah, that's probably pretty true. Okay? She chose to marry you, knowing, especially a Christian woman, knowing that means that she is promising to follow you for life. Is that going to be easy for her? No. Biblically, that's the way it is. But it's not going to be easy. The second thing you need to understand is that the husband may not mistreat his wife in any way. You are good time for my wife to come in. Don't say amen. Thank you. Ephesians chapter 5, verses 25 through 31 defines for us the relationship between a husband and a wife. And there are certain things there that I want to point out, being that it is Family Week. So turn there. I want to show you some things that might be helpful to you. You're going to get a lot more of this month. I promise you that. But notice this. First of all, just perusing down through there, starting with verse 22 and going down through the end of verse 33. Somebody tell me very quickly, how many verses are directive to the woman? 3? 3? Yeah, okay, 3. All right. 3. How many for the men? Seven, and if you include the connecting thoughts with that, 9. So you get 3 for the ladies, 9 for the men. Do you get the idea that suddenly we're going to carry a bigger responsibility? Yeah, so there's a first thing you need to note, okay? Second thing you need to note is that the husband's job is to lead sacrificially. Verses 23 and 24, the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Husband, you're to lead as Christ led, sacrificially. In other words, her needs before your needs. That's a hard one. And then verse 25, husbands, love your wives even as Christ loved the church and gave himself for it. This is unconditional. So your wife gets mad at you and decides not to make you breakfast some morning or burns the toast on purpose. You don't get to vote. You just love her anyway. A lot of husbands say, fine, if that's the way she's going to be, I'm not going to take out the trash. Like that's going to help, right? Let's have a little minor war going on here. Verse 26, that he might sanctify and cleanse it with the washing of water by the word. Your job, husband, is to help your wife be everything that she should be as a godly woman. That's going to bring conflict sometime. Needful conflict. Her job is what? Is she supposed to help you be the godly man you're supposed to be? Hello, anybody out there?
Yes.
So if she's supposed to help you, that means that sometimes she's going to call you out. And husband, sometimes you're going to call her out. You got to know that there's going to be conflict, because what you're dealing with are two sinners married together in a house, and at any given time, either one of them could be out of the will of God, and everything is topsy-turvy at that point. Doesn't change the reality of the responsibilities. Does this sound like Confucianism to you? Woman, obey me. I don't care. It's my way. There is no highway option. If you have to tell your wife that you're the boss, you're not. Okay? If you have to tell her to submit, you're not really leading. All right? So keep that in mind. Anyway, more of that coming this month. So let's move on to the friend-to-friend relationship in Confucianist societies. And I see this all the time at the school with children. And let's say you get a new kid, he comes into class, and the students want to know how old that student is. They want to know that because that's going to dictate how they speak to them, how they react around them. The pecking order in the class is all based upon the age of that child. But they're not going to ask that child, hey, how old are you? They're not going to do that. So they ask the teacher, teacher, how old is this new student? Because they need to know the pecking order. So they know how that they can respond to that person. And why don't they ask that person? Because they don't know how to speak to them yet. Can they say it normally? Or do they have to use, a more formalistic language? Or can they use informal language? They don't know because they don't know how old they are. It is so important to know the age. Now, I will also say that a 9-year-old and a 10-year-old will play together just like friends always do. They'll do things together just like friends always do. But if you ask them, are you two friends? No. Why not? He's 9, I'm 10. It's true. It is extremely important to know your pecking order. Even though they're only 1 year apart, it's important. I've had several sets of twins come through the lighthouse. And they know who is number one. And they don't mind letting you know, I'm number one. She was born 3 minutes after me. Hey, I kid you not. Isn't that right? That is absolutely right. I've seen it time and time again. So why? It's an influence from Confucianism. It's not necessarily wrong within itself, but it does prevent many people from understanding John chapter 15, verses 13 through 15. Somebody read that.
John 15:13.
Through 15, yes.
Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. Ye are my friends if you do whatsoever I command you. Henceforth I call you not servants,
Now, you all know that I'm involved in looking at translations, and the history of translations comes up when you're doing that. And I read that the passages that refer to Jesus as a friend, Koreans didn't want to translate it that way. How can he be my friend? He is my Lord. He is my Savior. He's way up there. But wait, Jesus said that. Jesus said friend. You have to use the word friend. You need to get a broader understanding of the word friend. They couldn't. They struggled with it greatly. Now, they did translate it correctly in that case, but it was a real problem. And then there are certain songs that we sing. What a friend we have in Jesus. Oh man, when they translated that song into Korean, the missionary, his name is Malcolm Fenwick, he said that it took a lot of work to get them to understand the concept of Jesus being our friend. Because why? They were Christians, but they were Christians at a time when Confucianism was strong, alive and well. And how can he be my friend? Because he's up there. You see that? So it became a problem for them in that respect. Confucianism is a very self-centered philosophy, and it teaches that man can do it himself. Man cannot save himself, however. That's what the Bible teaches us. And we are in desperate need of a Savior. So if you were to ever go the line of Confucianism, it's just not going to work out well for you, okay? That sort of thinking in the Christian realm needs to be balanced by spiritual truth. Do we submit to the government? Yes. Is it right? Yes. Paul said to do it, and Nero was on the throne at the time. So yes, it is biblical to obey your rulers over you. Is it biblical for the children to submit to the parents? Absolutely. Is it biblical for the wife to submit to the husband? Absolutely. And the friend-to-friend relationship, well, you know, if you want to define your friends as being exactly the same age as you know what they do next, by the way? If they're born in the same year, they can be friends. But do you know how we discern who the bigger friend is? So what's your birthday? Right? This is not biblical thinking, it's pride. All right? So we as Christians need to make sure that we're not thinking along those lines. All right, enough on Confucianism. Let's move on to shamanism. Yes, sir?
After you're emphasizing the point that the Bible overrides culture, though culture is always scratching or always
Yes.
friction.
Yes. You're never going to get away from that. Koreans have a very strong culture. It's true. Americans, we don't have any culture. Our culture is that we have no culture. Okay? We kind of worked through all of that, you know, from the 1700s to the 1800s when we had, you know, the Irish coming in, and the Chinese coming in, and Koreans coming in, and, you know, African Americans coming in, the whole 9 yards. And so as a culture, we don't really have a culture. But we do. We do have a culture. It's hard to define, but it's there. And my wife can tell you better what my culture is than I can, because she has to live with the reality of seeing how I think differently than her, for example. And with Asians, they have a specific culture and mindset, and you cannot overcome that. You were raised in a certain way, in a certain society, and that will influence you. And because of that influence, you have to be very careful as a Christian to make sure you are not going to an extreme based upon your culture. All right? All right, any other comments on that? Shamanism. First of all, what is shamanism? Back in 1987, I lived down in Yeonghwa-dong. The Haven was 2 blocks away from us, so that's why I lived there. And across the street from me was a shaman. And every morning she would get up, she would beat her little thingy, you know, making noise in the morning, and sometimes she'd be out there burning a pig head on the sidewalk and, you know, stuff. So I decided that I was going to get up earlier than her. You know, she made it a challenge. But shamanism, it's been called a system of beliefs that supposedly maximizes human potential in your mind and your spirit for healing and problem solving. And shamanism is alive and well in Korea and in America. And in many places in the world, there's shamanism. I heard a story about a guy. He was a missionary in the Congos, and he got really, really sick from something, and so they took him to the tribal priest, the shaman priest, and the tribal priest danced around him and shook a chicken around him like that, and then he took a cat and rubbed him all over with the cat, and, you know, let the chicken go and let the cat go, and then he charged the missionary $300. And the missionary said, $300? He said, well, yeah, you know, the chicken was pretty cheap. The chicken's only $50, but the CAT scan is $250. Yeah, bad joke. Shamanism, the word comes from a Siberian tribal word for its practitioners, shaman, said to have the ability to visit hidden worlds. Otherwise mainly known through myths, dreams, and near-death experiences. So it's a weird form of witchcraft. Okay? Traditional shamanism is where the shaman functions as a healer, a spiritual leader, and a mediator between the spirits and people. Now, tell me something. If I'm driving down the road and I see a bamboo pole with a big, well, not big, with a small red flag at the top, what is it? Brother Dew, what is it? Fortune teller, a shaman. Okay? Now, if I want to get married, me and my girlfriend, we're going to go in, we're going to see a shaman. So that shaman can tell us the best day to get married on. It happens all over this country. I'm telling you, everywhere you turn, you see it happening. It frustrates me to no end when I hear of Koreans who are Christians choosing a wedding date based upon something like that. I'm like, what? Yeah, well, that's a good day to get married on. What makes it a good day? For a man, tomorrow is a good day, right? But, you know, it's different for ladies. I get that. But shamanistic psychotherapy, a form of modern psychology, employs shamanistic techniques to produce psycho-spiritual integration, explore the unconscious, contact one's higher self, and so on. Americans, have you heard any of these terms before? Yeah? It's a part of our society now. Shamanistic medicine includes the application of animistic and various ancient witchcraft techniques to healthcare. Now, I want to pause there for a moment and say that what we are talking about is not Chinese medicine. Chinese medicine works. You're sick, you can go see the Chinese medicine guy, 7 herbs and spices, you come out feeling much better, okay? What is that? Well, it's just natural medicine, okay? So I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about a spiritual aspect that's brought in sometimes into things like that. And it could involve either shamanism itself as a means to health and enlightenment. And I have heard this more than once. I can't go to church. If I do, I'll get sick. This is shamanistic superstition going on. All right? That's what it is. I can't go to church. I'll get sick. The gods will curse me. Well, I'm sick now, and I'm still in church. And I don't have any gods. I only have one. And I'm pretty sure that he wants me to be here. Right? But they think that way. So there's this roadblock to some people who grew up in that sort of thinking that they're not going to go to church. They're not going to listen to the gospel Why? Because they believe if they do, they'll get sick. Special shamanistic techniques in conjunction with particular health programs. We use this today. We've got preachers today. Paul Yonggi Cho. Who is that? Paul Yonggi Cho. Hello, anybody? Yoido. The largest quote-unquote church in the world. And I use that term loosely. He says that when you pray, you can incubate in your mind, visualize what you're praying for, and God will give it to you. This is shamanism with a little Christian varnish. This visualization thing. You know how God answers prayer? When you pray according to His will. That's how He answers prayer. All right? Has nothing to do with how good your imagination is. Altered states of consciousness. Michael Jackson. Does anybody remember him? Okay. You know when Michael Jackson died, we didn't listen to Michael Jackson in my house, but when he died, it was big news. It was everywhere. And my son says to me, he says, Dad, I think Michael Jackson was adopted. And I said, why? And he said, well, his whole family is black and he's white. Son, let me show you some pictures of what he used to look like. All right? But Michael Jackson used to sleep in an what do they call that? A big thing and floating water where the water was body temperature and it was dark and it's sensory deprivation. And the whole purpose of that was to reach some altered state of consciousness. Well, guess what? This comes from shamanism. Dreams. If you are an American and you have a dream about a pig, what does that mean? If you're American and you have a dream about a pig, what does it mean? What? You're thinking about pigs. If you're Korean and you have a dream about pigs, what does that mean? Oh, yeah. If you're Chinese and you dream about pigs, man, that's a good dream, right? What's that got to do with anything? Nothing. Koreans, I'm over time now, but I'm going to one more illustration and we'll come back to this next week. Mrs. Taylor, tell me, what does the typical Korean Gishin look like? Long black, let's just stop there. Long black hair, a white hanbok, powder white face, a little bit of blood running here. Now, a Korean sees that and it's like, ah! An American sees that and he's like, man, she wiped that ketchup off her face, she'd be all right. What causes the difference? Not truth. If it's true in one place, it's true every place. It's culture. All right? And shamanism is deeply rooted here. Okay? So we'll stop there and come back to that next week. Let's close in prayer. Brother Kim, would you close us in prayer?